All right. Well, today we come to you here on Nerd Sesh following what was really a pretty magical night of basketball, one of my favorite nights of sports in a very long time, as the Nuggets completed what to me is one of the most impressive feats in NBA history outside of winning an NBA championship, coming back from 3-1 against a frankly much more talented Clippers team that had much higher expectations coming into the season, that had the advantage in games 5 and 6 when they were up by 15 and 19 points respectively, even went up double digits early in this one, and the Nuggets just kept coming. They just kept fighting. And now they're going to be going up against the Lakers in the conference finals. And obviously this is something that almost no one expected. Today we're going to be essentially previewing those two conference finals series. Heat Celtics has already started, so we can't quite call it a preview, but there's only been one game. We're really going to be talking about the keys to each of those series. But first, before we get into that, we have to talk about what we saw last night, because I think what a lot of people are focusing on is this was a collapse from the Clippers. This is an all-time level disaster from them and an all-time level disappointment. I think that that's fair. I think that that's true, but I also think that we need to look at this as the Nuggets went out there and took that. They took game 5, they took game 6, and they took game 7. And the Clippers ultimately, by not decisively putting them away in games 5 and 6, put themselves in a position where the Nuggets could go out there and take game 7. And they did. The Clippers just had an off shooting night, shot 26% from 3. Kawhi was 6 of 22. PG was 4 of 16. I certainly didn't expect that from Kawhi. He generally just dominates in these spots. And when you leave it up to a little bit of chance, where now you're in a game 7 against a team that you should have put away earlier, and it just comes down to sort of who gets the lucky rolls in some ways. And it was more than that. The Nuggets stars played better. The team overall seemed to want it more. They gave more effort. But for you, Logan, what are the biggest takeaways from last night's game for both of these teams?
The Clippers, as you said, didn't want it enough, Carson. They came out in games 5, 6, and 7 out of the half. They had their pillows under their arms. They had their pajamas on. They had their thumbs in their mouths, and they went to bed. The Nuggets came out of every second half with their hard hats on and their pickaxes in hand, ready to go to work. You said it, because I immediately went to the Clippers choked. No, they didn't. The Nuggets wanted it. This team is full of heart, and numbers-wise, embarrassing from the Clippers in every second half. Game 5, they go into the first half. They come out of the first half with a 12-point lead. The Nuggets outscore them by 18 in the second half. Game 6, 16-point lead going into the half, and the Nuggets outscore them by 30. And, of course, in last night's game, Kawhi and Paul George, as you said, did not score a point in the fourth quarter, and Murray and Jokic turned it on. Murray in the second half, 15 points, 4 assists, and Jokic, 6 points, 8 assists, and 12 boards. The Nuggets simply wanted it more, and the Clippers, they got lulled to sleep.
Yeah, and it's an unbelievable moment. It's such an incredible moment for a Denver team that had a slightly disappointing postseason last year, losing in 7 to the Blazers in a series I think they were better in and they had their chances in. They were the higher seed. And then you look at the position they were in this year, where it's not just that they were down 3-1 to Utah. They were getting out hustled. Utah wanted it more over those first 4 games. They were getting outshot. They were getting outplayed in basically every facet of the game. And then obviously Murray and Jokic asserted themselves. I think that the Gary Harris return was huge. He has changed this team defensively completely. If you look at the numbers from before he came back to after, they were just much better for this entire series defensively against the Clippers. But they do have a tendency to kick it up a notch when they need to. And you talk about the unbelievable second halves. They held the Clippers in the second halves of those last 3 games to 49, 35, and 33 points. That's unbelievable for such a dynamic offense that doesn't just have 2 quote-unquote superstars. Paul George is not a superstar, but I think that some people consider him to be in that tier. And he deserved it after last year, completely forfeited that position with how he played for this entire season, not just in the playoffs. The guy was not deserving of an all-star spot. And you also consider the quality role players around them, the bench tandem of Lou and Trez, and the Nuggets just suffocated them. So let's talk about this for Denver as we get into previewing this Lakers-Nuggets series. Again, it's a special moment for them. I think their role players were great. Gary Harris, Jeremy Grant. Paul Millsap didn't have a huge impact on the stat sheet, but he's really improved over these last few games. There were times where he just looked a little bit slow-footed, almost more like a liability early on in these playoffs, and he's been much better lately. But obviously the star tandem that stands out is Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, who at 23 and 25 years old were unbelievable every single time the Nuggets needed them to be. Murray's now at 27 a game in these playoffs. And what I've always thought watching Jamal Murray, because I watch more Nuggets basketball than I genuinely watch any other team, and I watch a lot of basketball. Murray has always been an inherently inconsistent player. I watched a video I made about the Nuggets 2.5 years ago, and I was saying the same things about him, how sometimes he'll get 30 plus, sometimes he'll disappear. We've talked about that a great deal on this podcast. I wonder if we're at the point where he's just gotten better at making the same shots, because I also think that he's engineered the step back three that he's using more. I just think sometimes we act like this is the same season, and it is, of course, on paper. But a 23-year-old with a full offseason who is a motivated guy like Jamal Murray, who knew he had to take a step up to raise this team's ceiling, I think he may have just gotten better. And it's sort of tough to quantify because he's taking so many of the same shots. He's taking so many of those 18 to 20 footers. He's still not getting the line, which he definitely needs to do more. He's attempting like 3 free throws a game. That's not sustainable for scoring 27 a game. He's also shooting 49% from 3. He's not going to keep doing that. So I'm not saying he's a 27-point per game guy going forward, but he's making these shots pretty consistently. Obviously not as consistently as the true superstars because he still has some off nights. It's sort of the nature of the style that he plays. But the step back three, do you think that Murray has just taken that step up and that now that takes the Nuggets a step up permanently going forward as a team?
Yeah, I think Murray has taken a step up, and I think you saying that he's gotten better at making shots that are difficult. To me, Murray plays like a EuroLeague guy almost to a point with how he gets into the lane and just puts up a shot because guys are expecting Murray to drive to the rack, and he just can put up that floater or he can put up that little mid-range jumper, and he's so good at it. I also think that obviously Murray benefits from having Jokic in the pick and roll, and Jokic is so adept at finding passing lanes and finding that open wing shooter or corner shooter for a spot-up shot. I think that this Nuggets offense we've seen has been way better outside with Murray and his jump in the bubble. Do you think that this offense can compete with the Lakers, and how much, I guess size-wise, how much bigger the Lakers are than them? Do you think that they'll transition to more of a perimeter game on the outside, or do you think that they will still try to work inside with guys like Jeremy Grant with little dump-off passes from Jokic into Millsap?
Well, I think that we're going to see the Lakers go with AD at the 5. I don't think they're going to return to their regular season starting lineup, and I'm actually going to talk about that as one of the keys to this series, in my opinion, for the Lakers. I think that the Nuggets are going to continue to do what they do best, and that is heavily rely on the Murray-Jokic pick and roll, and I'll get into that as well. But before we jump into talking full-on about the Lakers-Nuggets series, I just want to give a little speech about Nikola Jokic right now, because this man was my pick to win MVP before this season. I was dead wrong. He averaged 16 a game for the first 2 months of the season. But I am ready to say that Jokic is capable of being the best player on a championship team. I don't think it's this team, because I think that the LeBron-AD tandem is unmatched as far as star power in a very long time in this league. Maybe you could argue Steph and KD are there. Logan, I know you're upset with me, but the thing with Jokic is he's now a top 5 playoff performer of this generation. And I don't think that's an exaggeration to say. I put him behind only the 4 players who have been the best guy on a title team, that being LeBron, Kawhi, KD, and Steph. He's averaging 25, 12, and 7 on 51, 42, 84 splits over 28 career playoff games, facing elimination in 8 games, 25.6, 13, and 7. He has been great every single time. He has genuinely been more consistent than Harden, Giannis, these guys who put up historic regular season numbers, who can carry their teams to 60-plus wins, who deservedly win MVPs, but those are also guys who obviously have styles that are a little bit geared towards a drop-off in playoff success, and we've seen that throughout both of their careers. It's the formulaic, I don't necessarily have as many counters as a guy like Jokic. Does Jokic need a high-level perimeter shot maker to win a title? Of course. So does AD. So does Giannis. Every star player who does not operate from the perimeter in the modern NBA needs that. I'd say he probably needs it less so than those guys because he's such a great closer because of his unbelievable touch and difficult shot-making ability. And that is what stands out about Jokic. He just has more counters than almost anyone in the NBA. He was masterful yesterday. He can score 30 whenever he needs to, and I think that the Clippers were scared of that. He didn't do that yesterday, though, and he dominated that game. He was the best player on the court by far, followed by Jamal Murray, not Kawhi Leonard, but I just thought it was a desperate move from the Clippers to try to double Murray. I get that you want to force him to panic, to try to take him away as a scorer. I think Murray's improved enough as a decision maker, though, to where you saw he wasn't getting flustered. And you can't double the pick and roll when Jokic is the roll man. I mean, he's going to kill you every single time. He made the right decision every single time. It'll either put up that floater, which is such a high percentage shot from him because he literally is the best touch I've ever seen, or he's going to find the open shooter every single time. And I get it if you want to take the ball out of Murray and Jokic's hands, but a wide open Paul Millsap or Gary Harris or Jeremy Grant 3 is a very good look for them. When they were blitzing Jokic in this series, which they did for a lot of it, trying to double him out of the post to take him away as a scorer, it worked a couple times just because he's not exactly the quickest mover, but he adjusted really well, and he was consistently making the right play from then on. So he's the kind of player you just can't take away because of his touch, his post scoring, his passing, and that's really, really rare. Giannis does not have that. I'm not saying Jokic is the better player, but I'm saying he's a guy who really takes his level up come playoff time because he asserts himself more as a scorer. He gives more effort consistently. My mistake coming into the season was assuming that he would care about the regular season because he averaged 25, 13, and 8 in the previous playoffs. And I was dead wrong about that. But he's essentially replicated last year's playoff success this year. And I think when you look at a guy who, again, 25, 12, and 7, there are many superstars who will never have a single postseason as good as both of Jokic's first two have been. This guy is like all-time special. It's time to acknowledge that. He's a top 3 passer in basketball. He might be the best post scorer in basketball, and he is a winner. Yes, he can't jump, but that's okay. He can jump a little bit more now than he used to be able to, and the man is just downright special, and it's time to acknowledge that on a really high level. He's not just a top 10 level NBA player. He is a true superstar. I can't say he's top 5, but he is, to me, one of maybe 8 guys in this league who I can say if everything's right around them, they can be the best player on a championship team. I can't say that about Damian Lillard. I can't say that about some really great NBA players. I'm not sure I could say it about AD. AD is the better player of the two to me, but when it comes to a guy carrying a squad who can be your closer, who can be your creator for other, who you cannot take away his game because he can beat you in so many different ways, that's all-time special. That's my monologue on Jokic. Logan, what do you have to say?
I got 2 questions for you. One, do you have your "This Guy Loves Jamal Murray" shirt on right now?
No, I don't have it on. It's dirty because I wore it
Okay.
after they won Game 6. I was excited.
That's understandable.
I thought that was as good as it was going to get, and I was wrong.
Okay, my question about Jokic for you. So you said that you don't think that his championship comes on this Nuggets team. I think that this Nuggets team is really built for Jokic. Who else do you see being paired, or what style of player do you see going with Jokic in the future to get a title?
Well, I think that listen, if Jamal Murray plays at this level, you're getting pretty close. I think that they have some great surrounding pieces on this team. I don't think they're quite there, though. Like, who's their third best player in this series? Jeremy Grant. That doesn't really scream title to me. Maybe you could argue it's Gary Harris when he's asserting himself defensively. Maybe Paul Millsap when he's having a great offensive game. I really think another thing, just to speak to the third best player point, they just did this without Will Barton, who was unequivocally their third best player in the regular season, who at times was their alpha, because Murray and Jokic in the regular season faded at times. They are unbelievable clutch performers. We've seen that in back-to-back postseasons now where they both take up their level a notch. But in the regular season, sometimes they were just kind of like, sometimes Murray was just bad. Sometimes Jokic just didn't care. And then it was Will Barton was like, all right, I'll take over this game. And they haven't had him due to injury. So listen, maybe there's a path for the Nuggets. I think they're not quite good enough all around yet, and I think they rely too much on Jamal Murray to get them 30 every night when I just don't know if he's there yet, and I don't think they have an answer for LeBron and AD defensively. So, with that said, let's get into this actual series because that is the point of this podcast. Lakers-Nuggets, let's start with the Nuggets because obviously the burden is on them to prove that they can hang in this series and to go out there and take it from the overwhelming favorites in the Lakers. What to you is the first key to this series for the Nuggets?
It's going to sound cliche and typical, but the Nuggets are going to have to outshoot the Lakers. It's a foregone conclusion that AD and LeBron are going to beat the Nuggets up in the paint. But this Nuggets offense can move the ball and find shooters. It's what they do best. Jokic is shooting 44% from deep in the playoffs, as I mentioned. Murray shot 49% clip from deep in the playoffs. You mentioned earlier. Gary Harris, MPJ, and Paul Millsap are all going to have to shoot a little better in this series because, like you said, they cannot fully rely on Jamal Murray for 30 every night. But they've all looked solid for the most part. They're all up over 36% in the playoffs. simply put, the Lakers are going to go down and get their twos consistently down the floor because of this post presence for the Nuggets. And this offense is going to have to combat that with trays. We saw it against the Clippers, the over rotation on the pick and roll, leading to easy buckets for this Nuggets team. If the Lakers do that, I see the Nuggets competing in this series.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That applies to basically every series in the modern NBA. You just got to outshoot the other team. It's fascinating how many games come down to a single statistic, that being 3-point percentage. And I think you're absolutely right, because that's another thing where I look at this team. I think that talking about how you raise the ceiling of the Nuggets as a championship team, it's putting great shooters around Jokic and Murray. And Paul Millsap shot an unbelievable percentage from three this year. I don't consider him a great shooter. Gary Harris had a pretty rough season shooting from three. So you're right. If those guys knock down their open looks, that takes the level of this team up a notch, because that's really all they have to do. Besides that, it's Murray and Jokic going crazy. And that to me is the first key to this series. And maybe it's the obvious one. Murray and Jokic need to match AD and LeBron's output offensively. Somehow, these have been the two best offensive duos in the playoffs. That's incredible. I would not have expected that coming in. As much as I love Murray and Jokic, they're averaging 52.5 points per game. AD and LeBron are up at about 54. I think that when it comes to team defense, the Lakers have the edge. As you mentioned, they're going to consistently expose Jokic on the defensive end, just attacking downhill over and over again. I think that's a key for them. But on the other end, there's probably no answer for Jokic and Murray. As I talked about, Jokic isn't the kind of player you can take away. Neither is Murray, because the kind of shots he's making, you just can't really defend. So if the Nuggets can neutralize that star advantage from the Lakers, make this a role player versus role player series, then I like their chances, because yes, Rondo just had a great series. Who knows if maybe that built up confidence ends up coming back to bite them because he doesn't shoot 50% from three or whatever he did last series. When it comes down to Jeremy Grant, Paul Millsap, Gary Harris, Michael Porter Jr. versus Rondo and Kuz and Danny Green and KCP, it's possible for the Nuggets to win that battle. What's really tough for them to do, as great as they've been, is to win the star battle. And that is what has made the Lakers this unstoppable force in my mind for so long. They win the star battle just about every time. They won it against the Rockets. They won it convincingly against the Blazers. I think they would have won it against the Clippers. And the Nuggets need to find a way to neutralize that. What to you is another key to this series for the Nuggets?
The Nuggets have to box out. Another clear advantage for the Lakers is their rebounding advantage, with LeBron and AD nabbing 10 a night. And then you add in guys like Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee. The Nuggets simply don't have the size to compete inside as well. I don't know if that means giving Mason Plumlee more minutes or Michael Porter Jr. more minutes to grab some more boards. But the Lakers are 8-1 in games where they have out-rebounded opponents in the playoffs, and only 0-1 where they have been out-rebounded, surprisingly, by the Rockets. Simply put, more possessions equal more buckets, and the Nuggets have to limit the Lakers' possessions. I don't know if Jokic is going to be able to compete with AD and LeBron down there, but if they get out-rebounded, they are going to get ran over.
Yeah, well, speaking of boxing out, Jokic was unbelievable, asserting himself down low as far as grabbing defensive rebounds last night and fighting for balls that were up in the air, 50-50 balls, tipping them to whoever else was out there on his team, because I think he knows he's not going to be the one to get high up enough there to grab it. Can he do it for 7 games? I don't know. Listen, they left it all out there in game 7. The man is 280 pounds, even though he's lost some weight. And so it's not, and he can't jump again. So it's not easy for him to go out there and do that every night. But I think you're right. That's the kind of thing that they can't lose. They can't lose the battle on the boards. And that comes into what is my second key to this series for the Nuggets. They need to bring the same defensive intensity before it gets to game 5 down 15, because against the Jazz, that was the case. They were abysmal defensively until they literally had to be great, and then they were great. And if you look at them in the second half of do or die games, points allowed, versus the Clippers, 49, 35, 33, versus the Jazz, 44, 51, 42, average of 42.3 points allowed in the second half of games when they've had to win to stay alive. Unbelievable team defense. Guys flying around, incredible effort. And Gary Harris, as I mentioned, has helped that a lot. The Nuggets had the worst defensive rating in the playoffs in 5 games without him at 127 plus. It was the worst by far. They have the number 4 defensive rating since he joined. So they definitely played harder all series long against the Clippers, but I still think they took it up to another level if you look at when they really had to stay alive. And versus the Lakers, they just can't have those lapses early. There's no way that they're going to survive it. So what they have to do essentially is just play as hard as they can for 7 games. And I understand that that's really hard to do. That's not natural for any team, but they have to play harder. They have to play scrappier every second because there's nothing to save their energy for. This is an opportunity they didn't expect to have. You don't get out of there alive unless you just play harder than the Lakers in this series. You are overcoming a talent deficit. They survived against the Clippers because of it. But the difference between the Clippers and the Lakers is the Lakers have 2 guys who put their footprint on every single game, who dominate basically every single game in LeBron and AD. And the Clippers only had one of those guys in Kawhi, and even then he had a couple of rough ones. So we just need a lot to go right from the Nuggets. It's their stars playing at a high level. It's giving effort every single time. Logan, do you agree with me that that's another key to this series?
No, I don't think you understand, Carson. It's a part of Mike Malone's plan. He goes down 3-1. And then the other team's like, oh, we're just not going to worry about him. It's over. The series is done. And then when they deceive him, Murray and Jokic turn into, like the Monstars from Space Jam, and then just run over in the last 3 games. Carson, have you ever seen a team that, obviously it's unprecedented, a team coming back from 3-1 deficits like this.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen another team that can just turn it on at the drop of a hat like the Nuggets?
That's a good question. Yes, I would say the Golden State Warriors, but you expected it, right? Because they had such otherworldly talent. The Denver Nuggets, an average defense in the regular season, led by, again, a 25-year-old who was frankly a little bit flabby for much of this season, and a 23-year-old. You don't expect them to be the kind of team that has the switch like that. And yet they have somehow managed to do that, and that's what's so incredible about this team to me. Let's move on to the Lakers. What are a couple of keys to this series for them?
I don't think it's going to be too tough for the Lakers, obviously, as you mentioned with the star tandem. First and foremost, you cannot over-rotate on the Murray-Jokic pick and roll. It's a genuine work of art watching these two. I'm talking Pablo Picasso, Salvador Dali works of art. The Lakers are going to have to trust Anthony Davis or JaVale McGee when they post up Jokic, because you cannot have that wing guy come over. You cannot have Kuzma. Yeah. You can't have Braun, because he is going to find Jeremy Grant, Gary Harris, or Michael Porter Jr. sitting over there. And also in that same breath, you have to trust Rondo when he's on Murray, or whoever, or Danny Green, whoever they put on Murray. You've got to trust him. You cannot over-rotate, because this team will expose you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and it relates to what I think the first key to this series for the Lakers is. I think they need to stick with the same lineup they used against the Rockets. And you talked about trusting Dwight or JaVale with Jokic. I think that they got to trust AD, because you're talking about a guy who, to me, should have been the Defensive Player of the Year, has incredible length and athletic gifts, and I just want to have my best defender out there on their best offensive player, especially when it matches up positionally. And then I think that if you look at, even when the Nuggets play a more traditional 4, like Paul Millsap for heavy minutes, you put LeBron, you put Marcus Morris on him. That's not a problem at all. Those are strong physical wings who can hang with the 6'7", 260 Paul Millsap. And I think that, speaking to the point about rotating, they're going to struggle to rotate with 2 bigs out there. That just gives the Nuggets more to expose in the pick and roll. If they get any switches there, then that's just barbecue chicken for Jamal Murray or Nikola Jokic. And again, rotation-wise, you need a quick defensive unit out there for the Lakers, because the Nuggets make quick decisions really well. It's either out of the pick and roll, or, again, it's Jokic off the roll finding the open man whenever if they double him, if they double Murray, whatever. So when you have 2 big men out there, it becomes that much harder, and I don't think they need him. I think AD needs to be their rim protector. He needs to be their defensive 5 in this series. He's fully capable of it. It's time to stop playing around and saying, oh, I'm a 4, because they can't have Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee playing big minutes in this series. What do you think about that?
I completely agree. If AD refuses, they're going to get beat. You cannot compete with – I almost think it's a difference between error-wise. Like, this Lakers lineup is prehistoric when you have 2 big men out there. The Nuggets will – light you up with whoever they have at the 4. Millsap, MPJ, whoever they throw out there is going to kill you from deep, because we've seen it time and time again. We saw it when the Lakers and Nuggets played in the bubble earlier. JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard cannot rotate on the Nikola Jokic pick and pop. They are late getting there every time. And Nikola Jokic, I don't care how slow his release is, I don't care how long it takes to get out, he shoots over everybody. And that 2 big men lineup is 80s. It's 90s. It's out of date.
Yeah. Another fascinating thing about Jokic is that he somehow becomes a 10% better three-point shooter in the playoffs. I'm not going to question it. I'm going to assume he just doesn't even care about shooting threes in the regular season. He's just this gunslinging Serbian to me, just a Serbian badass who picks it up when he needs to. What to you is the second key for the Lakers in this series?
You have got to stick on Jamal Murray like glue. I can confidently say, Carson, with this last series against the Clippers, if I need a bucket and you give me one screen, I'm taking Jamal Murray. He's so smart at attacking defensive angles. I mean, even when Pat Bev, you give Jamal Murray an inch, he is getting that bucket. I don't care. I mean, Pat Bev is such a smart defender, and Murray would just find a sliver of floor, and he's taking it. It's going to be tough with the Nuggets setting screens and how they run their offense, because any player in this offense sets a screen for Murray and the offense is off, because everyone is so talented at passing, at shooting, at getting inside, at just positioning in general. But Rondo, KCP, Danny Green, whoever is on Jamal Murray is going to have to stay in his face. 5 games over 30 points in the playoffs and 6 game in double-digit made field goals. As you mentioned earlier, 49% from deep in the playoffs so far. If you give Murray that inch, it's already a bucket.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that both of your keys are on the defensive end, because maybe, you're assuming that offensive dominance from the Lakers, which I think would make sense. I think that one key that that isn't my second official key, but is pivotal to this series, is the Lakers role players making open shots, because that's such an uncertain commodity with them, just because they were such a poor three-point shooting team for much of the season, and then they were really good against the Rockets, and frankly, that's why they got out of that series almost untouched. But if we have a 30% three-point shooting series from the Lakers, which is not completely off the table, then the door is left open for the Nuggets to take this series. To me, the second key is, and maybe we can assume this is their game plan, but AD and LeBron need to attack Jokic again and again defensively, because the Nuggets effectively have no rim protector with Jokic out there. It was not difficult for LeBron to expose the lack of a rim protector versus Houston. Obviously, a more traditional lack of a rim protector because their tallest player was 6'7", but versus the Nuggets, it's the same idea. You either get to the bucket, or in doing so, you collapse the defense and you find the open shooter, and then it's up to that guy to make the open shot. In the playoffs, when Jokic is the primary defender, people are shooting 4% better than their norm against him. So subpar defense from him individually there. At the rim, he's actually been slightly above average, but those numbers have never made sense to me, how Jokic is reflected as an average to above average defender. I just think he's fundamentally not. Like, yes, he has quick hands. Yes, he's pretty smart, but the guy can't jump to contest. And I think that when you're going up against super athletes like LeBron and AD, you can really expose that. And Jokic can bear down in stretches. He was pretty good defensively yesterday, had 3 blocks, ate up a bunch of boards, played hard, but I can't really imagine him doing that for a series. And another thing that you unlock by just attacking downhill over and over again is you get Jokic in the spot where he's potentially in foul trouble, because he does have a tendency to, at times, just because of his natural laziness a little bit, just like slap at people or make dumb fouls there, and he probably can't guard either of these guys straight up. So you take Jokic out of the game. I love Mason Plumlee, but I will take more Plumlee minutes if that means that Jokic is off the floor every single day of the week. So for a Denver team that, as I mentioned, has taken it up a notch defensively, has so many wings flying around, giving 100% effort at all times, this is the weakness to attack. The reason I'm pointing it out is because it's hard to ask even LeBron and AD to just go downhill for again and again over a 7-game series. It's tiring. It's physically draining, but I think it's the weakness, and I think it's what they need to attack, and especially for AD, who has a tendency to favor the turnarounds out of the post or handling from up top. It's really going to be just attacking downhill over and over again, being utilized as a lob threat, and getting within 3 feet of the rim and putting the ball in consistently and drawing fouls down there. Let's move on to the series out east, which had a fascinating game 1. To me, a collapse from the Boston Celtics. Yes, the Heat were great late, but man, the Celtics should have won that game, and it was an abysmal Kemba Walker performance. Tatum really struggled to close late. Now that the Heat are up 1-0, which I did not expect, my official prediction for this series was Celtics in 5. Now I'll modify that to Celtics in 6, I guess, just because, obviously they're in a different position than I expected them to be after one game. But let's start with the Celtics. What to you is the first key for them in this series?
Like you said, we're going to need to see better shooting nights from Kemba Walker. That was abysmal and frankly unexpected. I mean, late he was still making some difficult shots in the mid range, what he always does, but those numbers
Mm-hmm.
are horrible.
Mm-hmm.
He shot 6 of 19 from the field, 1 of 9 from deep. You need better from a star. Again, I'm going to stick with it here. Like I said, for the Nuggets, you're going to need your shooters to shoot well. Marcus Smart and Jaylen Brown have to shoot lights out basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Marcus Smart, after game 1 in the series, he's got 4 games in the playoffs where he's made over 5 3-pointers. Semi-reliable. I think that Smart is not as bad a shooter as he was. Again, we're going to need to see a little more consistency. And while Jaylen Brown is a little bit more of a reliable bucket getter, he is still proven to be a pretty streaky shooter. 3 of 4 last night, but under 33% in 8 of the 12 Celtics playoff games thus far. Last night, he looked good from deep, as I said, but this Miami team has deadly shooters all over the floor, and they've shot a 5% higher clip in these playoffs. The Celtics are going to need some hot shooting nights from deep from this duo if they want to win. Like I said, though, too, Kemba is not going to be that cold every night. We should see a little bit more of an uptick in their offense soon.
Well, I want to touch on that point because that to me is the first key to the series for the Celtics. They need Kemba to be a reliable, big-time shot maker. He has been terrible since he made that incredible play to what he thought end Game 5, ended up obviously being that OG Anunoby hit that incredible shot to save the Raptors series. In the 3 games since then, per 36 minutes, 9.8 points per game on 28% shooting, 13.6% from 3. You're not going to get a big Marcus Smart game every time to bail you out. If Kemba just scores over 15 points this season, the Celtics are 34-9. But he has consistently had more lapses and more down performances offensively. And I think that what we've really seen and why this is a long-term concern for me is the Raptors started throwing a lot of doubles at Kemba, and he really struggled. Now the Heat were doing the same thing, especially through the first 3.5 quarters, and Kemba really struggled. Started 3 of 15 in that game, and just incapable of making good decisions, continues to try to force the issue. And honestly, a lot of this credit definitely needs to go to the Heat's perimeter defenders just because they're not letting Kemba get a step on them. Even if he's getting a switch with Bam, Bam is so quick, so good at moving his feet. Jay Crowder honestly did an incredible job of Kemba in some one-on-one possessions, but they need Kemba to take that level up because this is a guy who was gifted with incredible natural shot making off the dribble. If he doesn't, I think that we got to see them use him more off ball because part of what made him so great this season is I think he was 40+% on catch and shoot threes, and he took a bunch of them. So it was, even if he's not in the Charlotte Kemba Walker role where he's your ball dominant point guard, he was still great as an off ball weapon. But I mentioned the inconsistency from him. Tatum and Jaylen combined have almost the exact same amount as games with 15 points or less as Kemba alone has this season. 33% of Kemba's games, he has had 15 points or less, and they're essentially a 500 team when that happens. Versus Tatum, it's 17%. Jaylen, it's 15%. So they need him because I'll be honest, I think Tatum's fantastic. He should be the best player in this series, but he looked scared of the moment. And he took some really bad shots late where it was just ISO, and even if he had a smaller defender on him, he wasn't asserting himself. He wasn't trying to get downhill. He was taking tough shots off one leg or a step back 3. I just didn't like how they ran their offense late. And I think that if Tatum, as a 22-year-old, understandably, is not going to be at his best in the biggest moments, then they need Kemba to step up and take that role. And he was completely incapable of doing that last night, and that loss is on him. You seem upset by something I've said. What's up?
It's just the Tatum call. I think that actually proves that he's more reliable. Just the guy wants to take those shots. I see it as credit. I don't think he's going to miss those shots in the big moments.
But
again.
they weren't.
You think because he's missing that's a concern?
They weren't good shots. Like, I want Jason Tatum with the ball in his hands. The second to last shot he took in regulation, where he held onto the ball for however many seconds, that took like an awkward 20-footer off 1 foot. That was a terrible shot. The step back 3 to end the game, yes, listen, I understand that that's what we like to do. Luka obviously did it to hit one of the greatest game winners in recent memory. But I think when you're Jason Tatum and you have a smaller defender on you, try to get downhill at least a little bit. Try to get maybe a 15-footer. Try to draw a double so you can find the open man. Be aggressive because that step back 3 is maybe a 30% shot when it's that deep. That's not your best look late in games and obviously becomes harder to create offense. Things get more congested. Things are more tense. But still, I just didn't like the late game offense from him. And I shouldn't say that he wasn't scared to take the shot. I thought that he was scared to take the shots that he should have taken. It looked like he didn't have a plan. He would just like put his back to a guy from 20 feet out and then kind of just like dance around for a couple seconds and then take a tough shot. But listen, I love Tatum. I just think we're seeing right now really that this is 22-year-old Jason Tatum and not 27-year-old Jason Tatum. He's not that top 5 supernova talent right now. He's a guy who's still flawed and sometimes just doesn't show up in the biggest moments. Let's move on. What to you is the second key for the Celtics in this series?
They're going to have to be stout on the interior, and that encompasses rebounding, boxing out Bam Adebayo, blocking shots. It's going to be tough when you're matched up with a guy like Bam. And Jimmy Butler and Jay Crowder, they're all good on the interior and all solid rebounders. A lot of this resolves around Daniel Tice being a strong interior presence, making guys miss at the rack and grabbing boards. And I trust Tice. I trust him more than anybody on this team. My concern is when you get deeper in the rotation outside of Tice, like 6'6" Grant Williams or Time Lord, 6'8" Robert Williams. Now, I'll give Robert Williams his credit. He grabbed 4 boards, only 11 minutes, and that's what I like to see. Maybe throw him out there more, but Grant didn't grab any at the 4. They need, again, I'm going to revolve this back to the Lakers Nuggets. They need to limit extra Miami possessions because of the Heat proficiency from deep. And I don't know who they turn to outside of Theis to get them boards and clamp up Bam.
Yeah, and I think that we saw that when Tice fouled out of that game, that hurt them. They were having to play Grant Williams late, which I really, really do not like for them. I just don't think he's ready to be in those spots. To go along with what you were saying about limiting those extra Heat possessions, I think the Celtics just need to match the Heat's intensity because they're the more talented team on both ends. They are as well coached. They have 3 of the 4 best shot makers in this series. Maybe you take Dragic over Jalen. That's fine. Either way, they have the 2 best in Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker. But it was pretty glaring in the big game spots to me who seemed more ready for the moment, and it was the Miami Heat. They're the less talented team. The Celtics just flat out should win this series somewhat comfortably if it were played on paper, and they should not be getting beaten off of dog factor alone. Yes, the Heat are a hell of a shooting team. Yes, Jimmy and Dragic have been unbelievable lately, and that's a testament to them. They're incredibly well coached. They've thrown some wrinkles in defensively that have made things harder on the Celtics. But I feel like if the Celtics all play like Marcus Smart, if they all find that level of intensity, kind of like what they were able to get to against the Raptors, and even then it was a disadvantage for them against the Raptors because the Raptors wouldn't have been in that series if they hadn't just been able to outdog and out-tough the Celtics. But the Celtics were able to get tough enough to win that series in the end and gut it out in a tough defensive battle. They need to find that level consistently or they're going to be in trouble because if you look at these 2 teams on paper, fourth quarter should go to the Celtics. When things get congested, when it gets tougher to get a good shot, it should be Tatum. It should be Kemba. And it was the opposite. They froze up and the Heat went out and took that game. Let's move on to the Heat. What to you is the first key for Miami in this series where they are now, after 1 game, in control as the 5 seed in the conference finals?
They've got to run the Celtics to death. And I don't mean that purely in fast break points. I mean it in the fact that personnel-wise, anyone on this Heat offense can run point, they can run the break, and they need to use it to their advantage. Tyler Hero, even, he's such a smart passer. He's ready to zip a pass at the top of the key. He just makes crisp passes and smart decisions. I think Hero's a guy who's got superstar written all over him. He looks like mini Devin Booker to me. I don't know what Calipari is feeding those guys down to Kentucky, but he's up next.
13th and 14th pick of the draft, too. Those late lottery Kentucky guys getting a little scary.
And Jamal Murray, if you want to mention him.
True.
Jimmy Butler's another solid playmaker and ball handler when they need him to be. Bam Adebayo is surprisingly good at running point and rifling stuff from down court. Goran Dragic is Mr. Old Reliable. Hell, I've seen Kelly Olynyk run some pretty good fast breaks in the bubble. I mean, the point is the Heat move the ball just about as well as any team in basketball. They have a high IQ offense with smart passers down the lineup. All they need is a rebound, and they can push the floor. I think from a pure ball movement standpoint, how this team runs their offense, that's a clear strength the Heat hold over Boston because I think Boston has better like off the dribble shot makers. I don't think they have as good ball movers. And if the Heat move the ball well, it's going to be tough to stop them. I
agree. And I think that that's how this team has survived and gotten to this point without a top 10 player on their roster with actually, they had 2 All-Stars in Jimmy and Bam, but still not a 20-point-per-game scorer on this roster. I think you're right. I think that is definitely something that takes the Heat up a level as a team, makes them stand out, and obviously just their shooting. But I do think that this is a series where they're going to rely on stars. And I think that first and foremost, they need Jimmy Butler to be a fantastic closer. If he didn't do that last night, they probably wouldn't have won that game. And he doesn't always have that takeover gear. Half the games this series, he's had less than 20. Now they need him to have that takeover gear. And he was unbelievable. He had 8 points in the fourth quarter and overtime after just 12 through the first three, including that huge step back three in regulation, that big end one to take the lead in overtime, 2 big time go ahead shots late. He was unbelievable. I think it's interesting that we've seen him hit some threes with more confidence in late game situations than he did throughout most of the regular season, because he only took like 2 a game and generally looked pretty scared. I think that this is just a guy who truly embraces the moment, like in a way that very few people do. Like, he loves it. He feeds off of it. And that's really fun to see. So he needs to continue to do that, because if Jimmy fades, I will talk about how they respond to that with my second key, but I think that it makes things more complicated. And I think that they got to go with him late in these situations. And, it's really difficult for a team with Jimmy Butler to combat the shot making of a team with Kemba Walker and Jason Tatum, but they did it. And you're right, obviously ball movement, that is something that makes this team great. But at the end of the day, inevitably in late game situations, you go to your stars and it's about them getting their shots off the dribble. And we saw Jimmy was able to do that last night. I don't know if he's quite on that level consistently, so we'll see if he can continue to be there.
For the rest of the series, and I don't know if this is a key to yours, do you think that who are you taking shot maker wise? Are you taking the Heat with Hero, Nunn, Butler, or are you taking the Celtics, Brown, Walker, Tatum?
Celtics by far. I think that they have no doubt the 2 best shot makers in this series. That's as far as off the dribble. The Heat are probably the best 3-point shooting team in basketball, because you can run, Hero and Robinson and all these guys off of pin downs, and they're just absolute weapons there. Crowder, Iggy, those guys are shooting really well. But when it comes to one-on-one, I need a guy to get me a bucket. Tatum and Kemba are my first 2 picks in this draft, and that's what stood out about last night, is that they didn't play like that. Let's move on. What to you is the second key for the Heat in this series?
They've got to make defensive changes to slow down Jason Tatum. And I think that even to a point, I think it would be as extreme as, get a guy off Smart, get a guy off Brown, make them make shots, test them, because you don't want Jason Tatum to light you up for a 30-piece, because it's going to be hard to combat that. I don't know if you over-rotate with Bam Adebayo, because Tatum's a good enough passer where he will make you pay with a dime and a 3 in the corner. To me, if you can make a game plan change and stop a guy like Giannis, I think you can slow down a guy like Tatum. And I know that Tatum's a more dynamic shot maker and a little more crafty, but he's young. And I think if you can make him crack, if you can make him sweat, make him work, put Butler on him, and like I said, slide Bam a little bit, but don't overcommit. You need to make things hard for Jason Tatum, because the rest of the guys they're not going to crumble. I don't mean it as that drastic, but they will falter a little more if Jason Tatum is not as stout and solid on the offensive end.
And I think that the Heat did that late in last game. Obviously, Tatum's going to be thinking twice now that he goes into that rim area with what Bam did to him to end that game. But I think that it's more than that. Tatum was taking tough floaters and runners off 1 foot late, or he was taking, as I mentioned, those difficult step backs, those tough turnarounds. He wasn't getting easy shots. And I love Jimmy Butler so much because of that intensity that he brings. Like, when you look on those late game situations, when he could switch on to Tatum, he just had such intensity that, like, I was almost scared watching through the screen for Tatum. Like, I would not want to be guarded by that guy ever in these situations. And we saw that again against Middleton versus the Bucks. So that defensive level to me from the Heat has been brought up. And I think that Crowder and Iggy as acquisitions make it to where they can bring it up to that level you're talking about, because now they have real bodies, real quality defenders to throw at these guys. And you're right, it's harder to take away Tatum, but you make him work hard. You make him make tough shots in the big moments, and that's the best you can do. And if he beats you that way, he beats you that way. Or you're right, you take the ball out of his hands entirely and you let the role players try to beat you. And I think that that's the right play for them, because, a bunch of Marcus Smart open threes is not always a great thing for the Celtics. Sometimes that can be what loses in the game, because he goes 0 for 10 on them. And that's another thing that scares me for the Celtics about last game, is that they lost even though Smart was incredible as a shooter. So that's a scary moment. My second key for the Heat is that they continue to get this level of play from Goran Dragic. And I thought about talking about the Iggy Crowder tandem because they've been so good. Crowder was unbelievable. He helped them win this game, and it was on both ends from him. Some huge defensive possessions and hit 5 threes, hit basically every open look that he was given. He was fantastic. But I think it comes down to Dragic because the Heat now have a big three. They didn't have a big three during the regular season. If they did, that third guy probably would have been Kendrick Nunn for at least the first half of it. Now that you're getting this level from Dragic where he gave you 29 in game one, he's their leading playoff scorer at 21.9 a game on 47% from the field, 39% from three. When he's playing like this, the ceiling for this Heat team just goes up another level because, like I mentioned, Jimmy's gone under 20 points in half their games. Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero, Bam, they're not going to create for themselves off the dribble at a high level late in games. And so if Jimmy isn't showing up, now they have this safety valve in Goran Dragic. And I don't know if you can take the ball out of Jimmy Butler's hands late in games in these biggest spots. Sometimes I've said he doesn't have that takeover gear as a scorer in the conference finals. I feel like he probably will, and it's just about whether or not he makes those shots. But either way, through 4 quarters, Dragic is now a consistent 20-plus per game guy who's also going to get you about 5 assists, set up his teammates, and having that level of an offensive creator is unbelievable because, again, the Heat have 3 stars now. They didn't have 3 stars during the regular season. They had 2 stars and a bunch of really great role players. And when Dragic plays like this, they have 3 stars. At the same time, if he drops off, I think that really hurts this team because now they're losing that reliable second guy. And I don't think that they can overcome a team as talented as the Celtics without him.
Yeah, and Dragic is a guy who, in the playoffs so far, only 2 games in the negative plus minus. That's crazy. That means anytime he's on the floor, he is doing big things. And Dragic, to me, offensively, his game doesn't make any sense. He's not exceptionally fast. He's just really crafty and just knows where to be with the basketball. His repertoire of shooting shots, just a one-legged floater. It's really beautiful basketball to watch. Goran Dragic is a guy that I think you have to root for. Now, let me ask you this, Carson. If you see a guy like Goran Dragic, if the Celtics make defensive changes to slow down Dragic, is there anybody that can step up in that role for this Heat team?
I don't know. The kind of person to me who has the skill set, a guy who has not been getting many minutes, would probably be Kendrick Nunn, just because he has a little more creation off the dribble than Hero. I love Hero. I think that he had an incredible game one just because he impacted the game all around, 11 rebounds, 9 assists. But off the dribble, I don't think his handle's quite there yet. He doesn't have that explosive gear. Not that Dragic does, but he has that Slovenian slinkiness, that change in pace to where he just sort of bobs and weaves through the defense. I mean, it's a lot like Luka. They have that same incredible change of pace, craftiness, unbelievable touch. And so I don't know if we would see more Nunn minutes. I think that they would probably just rather go down with Dragic anyways. But I don't think that there really is an answer if he drops off, to answer your question. I think that that is the kind of thing that takes them out of this series entirely. Whereas if he's playing his best, then they become much scarier as a team. So now we are officially in an unbelievable time to be a sports fan. We have the NFL, and obviously we have these unbelievable conference finals. They were unexpected. We both only predicted that one of the 4 teams that are still standing would be here, those being the Los Angeles Lakers. For a couple guys who I think pride ourselves on our knowledge and the amount that we watch and talk about this sport, I don't think that that's necessarily anything against us. I think that it's just an unbelievable time of parity in the NBA when for the last few seasons, it felt like the championship was predetermined. And this year is completely different. I think the Lakers are bordering on an overwhelming favorite at this point, but if they went down, I don't know how shocked we could be considering the circumstances. So this was a fun one. That's going to do it for us here today. I've been Carson Brabber.
I've been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.